B1 family, welcome to Black Logic. It's my esteemed pleasure to introduce Miss Pamela Denise Long. How you doing, Miss Long?
I'm doing great, Black Logic. Good to be with you again. Second time. Love it.
Absolutely. I'm happy. I'm happy that you're here. If you would you please tell us a small synopsis of your background?
Yeah, so I am a native Mississippian, moved and lived in Chicago for a little bit. So somewhere between the South and the Midwest, my accent does whatever it does. So you'll hear a little bit of country and a little bit of not. I I'm a writer, columnist, a blogger. I do a lot of chatting and talking on Twitter, particularly, and in activism for, or I should say, advocacy for the multi-generational Black American community, including in my professional work and how I show up around it. And that includes reparations and all the things that restore our people to our rightful place and delivery on our legacy that this country owes to us.
Well, you definitely did a better job at that than I could ever do. So let's get started. I'm very excited to have you here today discussing some very important and detrimental topics for our people. I guess we will
Mm.
discuss, economic empowerment, illegal immigration, the justice systems, and of course, reparations. Now, starting with the justice system, well, you know what? Let's start with illegal immigration. I think that's important as well. Um,
Mm.
how would you characterize the current state of illegal immigration in the U.S. and what factors that contribute to its complexities?
Oh, such a good question. So, illegal immigration has probably always been a thing because we are bordered by two countries, land borders by two countries. And then, of course, by sea, we have a lot of sea borders as well, particularly Florida, which I believe is 65 miles from the nearest foreign country. Um, in terms of what perpetuates it, makes it worse, I think is the executive and his implementation or lack thereof of immigration policy. So we're supposed to have operational control of the border, and that's defined as basically it's codified in law according to Congress what operational control is, and we can look up that specific definition to read it into the record. But the idea is that the U.S. government has control over who is allowed into the country, and folks who have not been fully vetted through the proper mechanisms to come into the country are held, are detained until they can be properly vetted. None of that is happening. I think this idea that somehow we as a nation are supposed to be this beacon on a hill that anyone can come to get their next level of economic come up is contributing to illegal immigration, as well as the ways that we rely too heavily on visas, both for students and for professionals, to meet the needs of the nation instead of developing our own internal domestic pipeline of talent for all of our current needs and emerging needs as well. So there's some ways the citizenship needs to take a look at how we think about, who gets prioritized in our nation, and there's some ways that those who are supposed to implement our laws need to be held accountable.
Um, that kind of brings me to some legislation I'm going to pop up here, because at first I really thought it was the bidding of the Democratic Party that
Mm.
created legislation for easy pathways to citizenship, not just DACA members, but for mostly, brown or white immigrants, illegal immigrants that come over, because as well as Asian, because a lot of I'm starting to find evidence and information of a lot of Asian immigrants. They fly to Mexico, or they fly through Central America, come through Mexico and come across the border as well. And most information I've received from that was the Chinese. But when I saw this legislation here, it was very surprising. The U.S. Citizenship Act, and I'm not going to read the entire thing here, but basically, it states here that the bill established a path to citizenship for certain undocumented individuals. The bill also replaced the term alien with non-citizen in the immigration statuses and addresses other related issues. Specifically, the bill established a new status of lawful prospective immigrant. And basically, it goes on and states that after at least 5 years with the status, an eligible non-citizen may apply for and receive permanent resident status. And this was surprising to me because this was legislation proposed by a Republican. So I didn't know that Republicans were, they had their bid in as well to approving those who are in the country illegally. And basically it states here, after 5 years of being here illegally, then you too can be a citizen. What are your thoughts on that?
So to your point about the law, it is insane to reward criminal behavior or illegal behavior. The United States has a path to citizenship for those who want to go through the legal channels to get it. And to say that you're impatient with the current laws, therefore we need to create laws that are more lax to allow even more people in, I think is unpatriotic. It's counterproductive to having a law and order process to how people come into the country. And just because you want to have more economic come up is not valid reason for asylum or seeking refugee status. And what you see with these types of laws is that people are trying to find all these new ways to turn the United States into a land of economic opportunity for the other 8 billion people in the world. And that's going to spell disaster for American citizens in this generation, as well as the people who are going to compete with our children in the next generation, and so on and so forth. So I'm not a fan.
Absolutely. Now, some may argue that illegal immigration puts pressure on the job markets and wage levels for Black Americans. How do you see that? Do you believe they affect Black Americans and the opportunity that may be afforded to us if they did not exist or were in the country illegally?
Yeah, so several bits of historical data evidence to support the idea that illegal immigration and legal immigration negatively affect native-born citizens. We implemented the 1924 Immigration Reduction Act for the express purposes of, in the 1924 era, there were people who were born into slavery who were still alive. Right. And so we were trying to blend a country of freed slaves, free Negroes, white settlers who had owned those people or treated them as second-class citizens or even property, and white immigrants who were new to the nation, who weren't part of the founding population, but were thrown in the mix of that milieu of the founding population. So we were trying to, with Calvin Coolidge signing that legislation, trying to make sure we solidify what holds America together, and making sure that we, the people here at that time, our ancestors here at that time, were able to congeal this hodgepodge mix of people with conflicting interests. And what we found is, because the 1924 Immigration Act stayed in place until 1965, when they opened the borders again, is that when the Great Depression happened, because we didn't have as much competition from legal and illegal aliens, Black Americans did benefit some from those the New Deal for Americans acts, as did poor white Americans, because you didn't have as many mouths to feed. You didn't have as many people to choose from the hiring pool of. There was this huge, you want to call it a study presentation before the Civil Rights Commission, that talked about the impact of illegal immigration, particularly on incarceration rates for Black Americans and employment for Black Americans. And what it did show is that they could correlate, and I forget the exact percentage right now, 8 to 10% maybe, that illegal immigration negatively or contributes to incarceration rates of Black men with a high school diploma or less. They found that in the data. And so to act like illegal immigration doesn't have a negative effect on our citizenry is just foolish. And to act like legal immigration doesn't have an effect on our citizenry is also silly, because there are ways that people compete. Right. There are ways that people compete with us for any number of jobs: teachers, medicine, and scholarships, as well as technology, where native-born Americans should be cultivated to fill those positions.
Okay. Looks like we're all gonna have to learn Spanish here pretty soon. But anyway, that's a side joke.
I hope not.
What What are some potential policy approaches to address illegal immigration while considering its effects on the Black community? Like, what are some potential
Mhm.
policy approaches to address illegal immigration as well as, I guess, slow down the system or decrease the amount of immigrants and illegal immigrants
Mhm.
that come inside of the U.S.?
Yeah, no, great question. And that's what it all comes down to, right? It comes down to policy. What are we going to do about it? I think one of the first things we need to do is gain operational control of the border. That is the mandate from Congress to the executive, is not stop releasing millions upon millions of people into the interior of the United States when you have no
Absolutely.
idea who these people really are, right? So that's point one. And I think from an accountability perspective, you hear conversations about impeach Mayorkas, who is the director of Secretary of Homeland Security, and then impeach Joe Biden for their abdication of duty. I think those things are more than rhetoric. I think it has to be more than rhetoric, meaning it can't just be a political talking point that gets people riled up. That kind of accountability to enforcing the laws of the nation needs to happen so that people don't just start getting into these positions of power and doing whatever they feel like they want to do. I think the other thing is Black Americans are going to have to look at ourselves. There are some ways where we have bought into the Black-Brown coalition and everybody has a right to America while not really knowing or thinking about or being self-protective enough to say, no, I appreciate your situation, but we have to think of ourselves first.
So you're familiar with Governor Abbott, the governor of Texas?
Yes.
So he's still doing his, shipping and busing to sanctuary cities, and something he posted on his Twitter, over 10,700 to DC, over 11,500 to New York City, over, I'll just say 5,000 to Chicago, over 2,100 to Philadelphia, over 500 to Denver, and over 290 to LA. And he states that we will continue busing migrants to sanctuary cities until Biden does his job and secure the border. And he implemented the floating barrier with the little orange buoy sort of things. What is your take on all of that? The sanctuary cities, them shipping, them busing and flying, as well as the floating barriers?
Oh man, you ask a lot in that one. The idea of a sanction, I mean, and it is a lot, right? It's like, how many ways can you screw over the American people where immigration is concerned? So,
right.
In regard to sanctuary cities, to me, it's insane. And I think derelict of duty to secure the nation and the states within it, to have a place, a state that says we're not going to cooperate with immigration and customs enforcement, which is ICE. We're just not going to cooperate with the law, and we're going to welcome people. I think New York has messed around and found out, as the saying
Yes, they did.
goes. Okay, and it's New York, right? It's the financial capital of the world, and they can't handle 30,000 folks in their sanctuary. They've been overwhelmed to the point where now they have to declare a state of emergency. So the sanctuary cities need to go away. And I would say,
Absolutely.
in terms of things that we can do, the people need to figure out what does it take to decertify their state as a sanctuary. Does that take a constitutional amendment? Does that take a referendum? What does that take for the people to decide if they want to be a sanctuary or not, and all of the burden that brings? To your question about Abbott and the floating devices, so I do understand that they're saying that there was someone who was caught within those devices, or the body got caught on the devices, because they play with the wording. People drowned in the Rio Grande, and they've drowned in the Rio Grande trying to get to the United States,
yes,
probably ever since it's been there, right? So it becomes a question of, did the buoy cause them to drown, or did they drown somewhere else, float up or down river, right? And their body got caught on the buoy. I don't have a problem with the buoy being in place. And I think Governor Abbott is correct to say that in the face of a derelict executive, which would be the president, who has the responsibility of enforcing and implementing law, in absence of a president who will do that, I am going to secure this known alleyway, if you will, to law breaking in the United States. And we can duke it out where it's concerning the separations of power and the like. So I don't have a problem with that at all. Now, there's another question you asked me in there that I want to make sure I don't miss as well. Or did I answer them?
I think that was pretty much it. You pretty hit the gist of it. I agreed to it. I did a video on it. I definitely agree with the floating barriers, especially with the the federal government not doing their job by securing the borders. And the busing and flying to the sanctuary cities, majority of these cities are Black, and a lot of these mayors and governors who are Democrats and or Black or Democratic shield, so to speak, they're now taking the meager resources that was in those areas, and again, just like they did Asians back in the day, they're placing them in the Black community, and now all of a sudden they have legislation, they have money, they have resources.
Right.
I did a story referring to these two gentlemen. I think they were from Nicaragua, and they received an apartment. They was getting a stipend for $2,000 a month, and they were about to be handed driver's license. And then they were looking. They was going to assist them with jobs. So, if people do not believe that legal and illegal immigration, and I'm more against illegal immigration because they didn't go through what other people had to go through to be in this country. But we're overloaded with all types of people from everywhere else because the Black Foundation of Black American Family ancestors did a lot from slavery through Jim Crow, through civil rights, to build and create these opportunities with the laws that are already in place, and we're not benefiting from them. So I guess that's kind of my take on it as well.
Yeah. And I have a question for you, Black Logic. I'm curious to know, with your ear in the community, in the Black American community, what are you hearing about people's tolerance for another 4 years of open borders, more Chicagos, and more displacement of Black Americans? What are you hearing about that?
I guess the only energy that I'm really hearing is from the Chicago sector, because they have been really affected more so, I guess, in New York, because New York is an enclave, such a large area of so many different immigrants, and they have been weeded out just as well as they've been weeded out in California. And a lot of them have been migrating down to, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Texas. So a lot of our people are now galvanizing and moving towards the South because they've been bombarded with illegal and legal immigration by the way of the Democratic Party, unfortunately. So that's the only really resistance I've heard on a strong front was from the citizens of Chicago. I was speaking to my brother Afro Elite, and he has some sentiments. He's gathering reparations task force, as well as assisting those brothers and sisters in that area to help fight against this immigration, where they're putting the hundreds and thousands of people in old high schools and clinics. They're even building more buildings to house them in. And even though they ousted and didn't re-elect Mayor Lightfoot at the time, she got ousted. She didn't get re-elected. They brought in the new guy. I forgot his name.
Brandon Johnson.
That guy. And he's doing the exact same thing. He's picking up where she left off, because now the resources that the Chicagoans, the Black Chicagoans, were petitioning to the government, the local government, in order to receive, to help build the infrastructure and create jobs and reduce the amount of homelessness they have in the area, that's going to the illegal immigrants.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was astounded by the 50 million for just June. And then I guess, and then they found some more money. And the fact that they're living.
Find money. I haven't found any yet.
True, right, especially in the tune of that. So they took money from other allocations and earmarked it for these people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the living in the police station and the whole deal. It's really a wild time to be alive, to observe this kind of stuff. But you raised a point about the idea that Johnson is implementing what was happening with Lightfoot. And I would ask all of us to really look at the extent to which there is already a political agenda and plan in place, and that the different people who get elected implement certain portions of it. For example, Donald Trump had in his agenda to make Juneteenth a national holiday. And
Right.
guess who made it a national holiday? Like,
Good
what's the
old Joe
likelihood?
Biden.
Right. What's the likelihood that that would just be like, what's the likelihood that that's a coincidence? So, and we see a lot of these things happening. So the question that I have is, what purpose, what political or other purposes are these illegal aliens serving for the larger agenda? Because I'm noticing a pattern. A pattern I'm noticing, and I named this earlier on, I believe it was last year, that there were able-bodied young single men lined up at the border, well dressed, from various countries, lined up at the border. I jokingly said that they were here to wrangle up white folks, who were the January 6th types, right? The types who are just like, out of my cold dead hands, and I'm about to roll up in here no matter where you are, and give you that work, right? But we should all be asking, where did these people come from? What skills do they have? And I don't mean that in a derisive sense. I mean that in the sense of taking inventory of what they know. What are they doing in the next 5 to 6 years? Because some of them have court dates that are 6, 7 years away.
Absolutely.
Why are they here? Why is the country allowing this in this way? We should be concerned and investigating.
That's a powerful question you raised, because I've talked about this. I talked about, we keep stating that we don't have enough skilled workers in America. Like, we can't create workshops like we don't already have it, but we do. And the one thing that a lot of us is missing is, I live in Texas, so I've had Mexicans over my home working on things, people from different countries, Honduras, you name it. And what I noticed is, all of these people are not skilled as some of us may think. A lot of them are learning on the job. The only difference is, if you hire an illegal, and most of these guys, unfortunately, can't speak English, so you can't communicate, you don't have to pay them the minimum wage that you would for a worker with that skill set. But a lot of them, I'm noticing, they're just watching people do the job. They're kind of like handing them tools, things of that nature, tell them to do a certain task, but they're learning on the job. And a lot of them come over here with no skills, and they know that they're going to get picked up and they're going to learn on the job. So again, and again, I can't really say it's mostly Democrat, as I saw that, U.S. Citizenship Act is Republicans as well. But when it comes to the Democrats, I think they're using these people, giving them citizenship, so they can pretty much block out the black vote. We no longer need the black vote anymore. We can just use these guys that we gave all of these benefits, all of these resources to. They're going to be the new black base that we need to stay in office. That's my thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I can see that. I can understand that. I don't disagree with that necessarily. I think maybe there are multiple motivations, but an anti-black motivation has been consistent throughout the nation, right? So I've taken to calling both the people who pretend, the Democrats and the people who pretend to be Republicans, I've taken to calling them Confederates, because there is no way that you are interested in and committed to the post-Civil War social contract and the implementation of that contract, while you are literally bringing in, so it's 5 million the last time I looked at the data, but it's probably close to 7 million people who've been released into the country at this point. And here's what I want you to think about: released into the country against law, right? And that's the ones who, when you're talking about the ones who got away, right? And the ones who were here before Biden even took office, who snuck over the border, who hopped in a boat and sailed to Miami or whatever, or who came over on an airplane on a visa, and they just decided to stay and got lost into the country.
And believe it or not, that's how a lot of the Asians get over here and stay. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think they represent a pretty sizable number of those visa overstay folk. Here's what I would like us to think about. So the last data we saw said there were about 5 million illegal aliens in the 2 years of Biden's administration, right? Wow. So we're on the other side of half done. Wow. And that's the ones we can estimate and know about, right? Remember that there were 4 million, an estimated 4 million slaves, free people, at the time of emancipation. There are now 40 to 50 million of us, depending on how you want to think about this.
I'm right with you, because I always say the 13.4, we're mostly close around 15% now.
Oh, absolutely. And maybe even more because, we don't like people in our business. I ain't filling out that form.
You
Get
knock on
off
my
my
door,
porch.
I'm like,
Right. Exactly. Right. And so, but think about that 4 million people then, right? And then how many people is that going to be? Children who are going to compete with our children and grandchildren in, let's say, a generation, 25 years, 2 generations, 50 years. What is all of that going to look like when we've outsourced so much of our jobs, when we've gotten away from the idea that we need to be committed to all Americans first and foremost, like Japan is and other nations are, and they ridicule us for it?
absolutely. How does systematic racism manifest within the criminal justice system, and
Mm.
what reforms do you believe are necessary to address it and fix it?
Yeah, so this reminds me of that. Was it Ron DeSantis who said on day one he was going to repeal the I'm drawing a blank. What is it? First Step Act? Is he the one
Okay.
who said that? So the
I
first step, I
I'm
think
not
he
familiar if
did.
he said that or not.
Okay, I think it was DeSantis who said that on day one he was going to repeal the First Step Act, and of course the First Step Act was President Trump's initiative to minimize the impact of mass incarceration on people who really didn't deserve to be incarcerated. So, and we've known this for quite some time that there was this 100 to 1 weight discrepancy between powder cocaine and rock cocaine, and then how
Right.
that triggered the federal level of investigation and punishment and the like. So, I think that anti-Black American bias is so pervasive that people sometimes aren't even consciously aware, that they're operating from a biased perspective. And then I think there are people who are quite consciously aware and they think it's the right thing to do, because that's just the social norms within their professional networks, personal networks, family, all the like. It's just the water that we swim in. And I think there are no systems. I think about Neely Fuller here with what does he call them? Not domains of life. I'm thinking about my other professional language there, but the areas of people activity, right? There's no area of people activity where anti-Black American bias isn't a thing, right? So, I've been fortunate so far to not have had any personal experiences or close family experiences with the incarceration system, but I am acutely aware of how it affects the broader community, even though I haven't been negatively
You're not
affected by
oblivious.
it.
I totally understand.
Thank you, breaking it down. I'm not oblivious. I'm paying attention, and I'm bothered by that
Right.
level of inequity and racism in our nation, from judges making deals to send kids to jail, and from lawmakers signing contracts with private prisons to keep the beds full. Like, how that seems so incredibly unconstitutional and unethical. Exactly, money, money, money to me. So reforms are absolutely necessary. And I think in some ways, I'm not for necessarily abolishing the police, but I know there are some departments and some units that absolutely need to be gutted. And my friends, close friends who are in law enforcement say a similar thing. There are some units that are so corrupt from the top to the bottom that you have to actually start over with your screening and re-bringing people in, or letting people go and not hiring them with that kind of power.
Absolutely. And that's from Boston to California, to tell you the truth. And I'm
Right.
going through, sweep through when it comes to the police departments you're referring to, because you're here all throughout the US. Now, are there any specific policies or practices that disproportionately affect Black communities? And how, if so, how can that be addressed to fix, them being disproportionately affected?
Are there any policies that disproportionately affect Black communities?
Right. Because
I think
I heard the thing. I heard your I went into the pre-recorded Twitter space. I think you said there's no such thing as benign neglect.
I did.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that was part statement and part question, because how can you call political neglect taxation without representation, and people saying, I'm not going to do anything that only benefits Black people? How can you call that benign? How can you call that anything but something other than friendly and just nice, but I'm just not
What's the
paying
opposite
attention?
of benign when you're talking about cancer?
Yeah, so malignant,
There you go. That's what it
right,
should be called. Neglect.
malignant, right. And in terms of like intent and attitude, malicious. In terms of professional responsibility, malfeasance. I think all of those other more charged descriptors fit with benign. But then we got into a conversation about the fact that benign neglect is a formal policy that's been adopted by the United States through the Moynihan report, and his report that he wrote in 65, I want to say 65, 66, 67, somewhere around there. And then the letter that he wrote to President Nixon saying, we need to cool it off with a little bit with all this back talk about Black people. Yeah, let's help them and whatever. But, you know, we need to stop talking about it so much out in the public. And that's exactly what we've been living under since that time. But one of the things that I will say is, to your question about what can we do,
Right.
the government has already written laws, legislation, as well as executive orders that are designed to address disparate impacts of policy. For example, we have the National Environmental Policy Act that was put into place in 69-70 by Richard Nixon. The idea that you're supposed to look at the impacts, potential impacts of any federal action on the human environment, the people who will be affected by whatever you're proposing. That also includes legislation. You have a legislative proposal, you need to have a federal analysis or an analysis of the potential impacts of that proposal, if it goes into place, on all the people affected. And if we had that legislative acts, both executive orders, legislation, appropriations across the board, submitted to NEPA review, National Environmental Policy Act review, we could identify those potential negative impacts at the forefront and mitigate the impacts of those negative impacts. I mean, you know, Clinton signed the Environmental Justice Executive Order, EJEO, back in February of 94. And then in September of 94, the crime bill came out. Why didn't we submit the crime bill to NEPA analysis? Why didn't we look at the potential negative impacts of 3 strikes you're out on women, children, hiring, home values in the area? If we're going to rally up men and just throw them away for 20 years, what's going to happen to? So there's so many things that are already on the books, which are not being enforced and not being implemented. And that in and of itself is a big problem. But we also have tools to identify the negative impacts in the onset. So I would like people to look up NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, and understand the Environmental Justice Executive Order, and anything that is a federal action. Reach out to your legislators to let them know you know what NEPA is. You're asking that all proposals that they initiate, co-sponsor, and sign onto, that they look at, they submit it to NEPA analysis. You can do the same for your state level of government and your local, because federal dollars and actions roll downhill.
You know, this whole, when we talk about the justice system, there was something that a gentleman said during the, I think they had a town hall in Chicago about the illegal immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about, you know, where's the support for, you know, reform inmates? And it made me think of this question: what efforts should be made to reduce recidivism rates and promote successful reintegration of formerly incarcerated Black individuals into society? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a deep question and so incredibly important. I mean, we know that crime in so many ways is tied to both trauma, the stuff that people experience, psychological things that overwhelm their ability to cope, right? And I think many inmates, many people who commit crimes say, if I could take back that 5 seconds, right, where I blew up and I made a decision in my anger, in my frustration, in my trauma response that really affected my life. but the other side of that too is so much trauma also comes from divestment from the Black community. In many ways, crime and poverty go together, especially that subsistence violent type crime that we see in inner cities. I think that there need to be really robust community development efforts that are designed to clean up communities from the physical environment perspective, that are designed to help people who have been incarcerated grow and develop businesses, because sometimes that's the only way they're going to actually be able to make ends meet legally, since so many places have the box, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And many people will just discard you if you have.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So helping people grow businesses. And honestly, I know I talk about reparations as if it's a panacea, but I do believe that the people who say money can't buy you everything probably need to like give it to us and let's see if we could test the theory. You know what I mean? Like, you might be right, but let me see.
But it can buy me a goddamn house.
Right. Okay. And it can buy me a car, and it can help me feel like I don't have, no, not help me feel. It can help me not have to work 3 shifts. It can help me not have latchkey kids all day and all night. It can help me get enrichment opportunities for my family. It can help me save for college, because we know that kids with even $500 saved for college are more likely to go to college. It can help me to get a lawyer when some bigot stop and frisk me and locks me up for some insane mess, or tries to get me to cop a plea deal, because if I go to court, they're convincing me that I'm looking at 30 years versus 5 and 10 years of probation. So there's so many things that money can do. So I think that's all of those systemic things are a part of it. And I think we need more wraparound services where folks who have been incarcerated are helped to re-enter. Well, first of all, training. What are you doing while you're incarcerated? Are they habilitating you in any way? Are they teaching you new skills in any way? Can you go into prison and then come out an electrical engineer, or at least know how to code? You know what I'm saying? And if we're not doing that, then why are we sequestering people from society for a crime if we're not helping them to be more successful when they've done their time?
I kind of got this from my brother, but a lot of them come out very, very intelligent. They just have a lot of book knowledge, but it usually end up in plebiscite Bible. They just talking about all types of stuff. Like, they have no skills to essentially offer society, but they know a lot of information. So yeah, that's my take on that. Let's move on to economic empowerment, if you're done with that piece.
Yeah.
Now, how does economic inequality intersect with racial disparities, and what strategies can be employed to promote economic empowerment for Black communities?
So there's the system responsibility, right? Which is, you broke Black people, right? You've divested from their communities for so many generations. You've incarcerated their husbands, brothers, and the like. You've outsourced so many jobs. I think 67 thereabout% of white men have a high school diploma or less, and about 75-ish% of Black men have a high school diploma or less. Men who are in that education level tend to hold particular types of jobs. You are replacing them with illegal aliens, and you've outsourced manufacturing. So what you want a brother to do? Right. So I think the business development piece is very important. I think the importance of community college and trade schools cannot be underscored. Yeah. I mean, gosh, even like being a handyman, it's so important, because if you're a person who has great customer service skills, you're very handy, and you're trustworthy, you could develop a great business for yourself. For older people who aren't able to do those things, for single women, or even people with disabilities who need to be able to rely on a trustworthy person to come in and do anything, hang your TV, cut your grass, fix the shingle that blew off, or, hang the gutter, clean the gutter. I mean, all of those types of things. So I hope I'm answering the question that you ask. And the other element of that, in terms of the intra-community economic development piece, is we have to start ethnic networking. We have to start supporting each other's businesses as well as
Absolutely.
channel. Yeah. I mean, other groups do it. So why don't we? Why do you
I
think
just
we
said that on
don't?
one of my videos yesterday because this is my reality. I know whether people agree with me on that. This is definitely a white supremacy global system that we're living in. And it is the plan, is the mission of the white supremacists to keep Black people destitute and impoverished. That is what I know. Like, we can look at statistics, or we can look at our 2-hour research. I can go about the Southeast DC and look at my brothers and sisters who are trying to make it, and they don't have a record. Some may have a record. And you look at the amount of people who have been wrongfully convicted, who have been exonerated,
Mhm.
who have been part of, I forgot that organization that go around and take a triple look at your case to see if things were
Is that
done
the
properly.
Innocence Project?
The Innocence Project. Thank you very much. They have let majority of the people they've gotten free are Black people or Black men.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
we see a disparity. We see the bias and the racism within the system. And again, I'm always looking at the bigger picture because that defines to me what are happening on these lower levels.
Oh, absolutely. You have to look at the bigger picture. And I think Harris County, Texas in particular, has, I think the
Mm.
Innocence Project, it's either the Innocence Project or something akin to it, about
Mhm.
wrongful convictions, profiled Harris County because of planting drugs, the exonerations that have happened there, where Black
Correct.
people are 13% of the population, but they're like almost half of the
And I
people.
think Harris County is the Houston area, correct?
It is, as far as I understand. Yeah.
Right.
So that's noteworthy, right? That's profound. And then when you look at Texas and its historical relationship with the freedmen Black American community, that amplifies this idea that it's an unbroken chain of harms for the people. And for those who aren't familiar, I just mean, Juneteenth is because of the fact that people were still enslaved in Texas, even though they had been emancipated, and that
Correct.
Texas made that commitment, right, to be a slaveholding state henceforth and forevermore, and to the point where I think Texas cut off, so to speak, the top part of its territory that extended above the, was it 40 or 43 degrees latitude, that, if you were slaveholding, if you were a state who came into the Union, you couldn't have slaves if you were above this degrees of latitude, longitude,
Yeah, because
whatever.
you're right. I think they made something similar in Missouri to 30 degrees parallel, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah. So talk about commitment. But yeah, it is a system. And I think some white people don't want to hear that because they don't
No,
want to feel guilty, and they also don't want to be associated with that reality, right? But
wrong
it is
attention.
a reality. Yeah, and what's fascinating about Ron is that he has a bachelor's in history from, is it Yale or Harvard? I know he has Yale and Harvard in his education. One of them he got a law degree from, the other he got his bachelor's in history from. Like, what was they teaching?
Yale Community College.
Well, right. Unaccredited. Right.
Unaccredited.
Unaccredited. Right.
I
So
have a
yeah.
question. I have a question to pick your brain, because I'm always trying to look for solutions. Are there any successful models or programs that have effectively lifted Black communities out of poverty and increased economic mobility? Are there any models out there?
So in terms of corporate, nonprofit type
Anywhere?
models, I can't speak to those. But what I can say from a systemic level, and I'd be happy to know about them, what I can say from a systemic level is two things come to mind for me.
Okay.
Reconstruction for the brief 5 to 7 years that we had it. We had some 2,000 actual freed slaves and free Negroes, right, get elected and help the nation implement the things that we benefit from today, in terms of, Black towns, freedmen towns, that served the freed population, gave them, health care and all of those types of things they didn't have. And so Reconstruction and immigration moderation. So maybe 3. Well, I'm going to say 2, because I'm going to say those 2. I was going to say civil rights, but the reason I didn't say civil rights of the 1960s is because the reason we even needed those to begin with is because Reconstruction was resisted successfully through the Confederates, because we had civil rights acts of the 1800s, the Reconstruction era. We needed civil rights of the 1960s because they kept trying to find a way to get around doing Reconstruction. So I'm going to say Reconstruction and immigration moderation are the 2 things, and buried within, not buried, but baked into it with Reconstruction is reparation, right? So implementing Special Field Order 15 and its equivalent in economic dollars, including the cash payout, because we can never recoup. Can you imagine how much that land in Special Field Order 15 would be worth to us today? So you talk about
Millions.
Bruce's Beach.
Millions.
Probably even more than that. It would probably be worth billions, because we're talking about whole states.
I'm talking about per Foundation Black America.
For sure.
Millions.
Oh, yeah.
Acres?
And then 40 acres and a mule and an agrarian society where you could just benefit from your cultivation, your crops, and then, earn from that to benefit yourself and your family. And then when you put all those 40 acres together for those 4 billion people or whoever was going to benefit from it, we're talking multiples of billions of dollars.
Absolutely.
So you want to build Chapel Hill within the freedmen community? Here's what that's going to cost you to rent this land from us for the next, whatever.
We're not selling it.
No, never that. Right. Well, I don't know the whole ins and outs, but I feel you on that. But maybe they could have, rented it for an extended period of time, or maybe that was a condition of them getting it back. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, that's something that my family would be owning in some way forever, that I would lease back to the city.
Yeah, I know within the contract there was a lot of trick language, but they were stating that a lot of the people involved in the deal were they were elderly and old, and those people were not thinking about generational wealth. There's no way they were thinking about generational wealth, because like you were saying, they could have leased out the land. They could have kept that land in their family for hundreds and thousands of years. Yep. And none of them will have to ever worry about it, but they wanted the bag right then and there. They wanted to go to Maui. I don't know where they wanted to go, but they could have definitely kept generational wealth. I don't really have much to say about it. I covered it a little bit, but yeah, it was very disheartening.
What did they get? How much was it? 20 million?
20 million.
Yeah, so that would have been your
property.
That would have been your down payment. Yeah, that would have been your down. So it's balloon mortgage, right? So you give me that 20 million now, and then you lease it from me forever for the next, for whatever amount that felt fair, commensurate to what was happening on the land. So
yeah, because it's coming from the city, and you sold it back. Oh my God! I would have put some hotels on it. I don't know. I would have put a one of those Ferris wheels on it. I would have did something.
What's on the land now, though?
I think the city. I think the city, and what the city most likely is going to do is sell it to a developer.
Right.
And they're going to make 10 times the amount, I assure you.
Yep. And so here's the other part. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. By all means.
Well, see, I mean, what you're sharing with me and what we're talking about now, we talked about economic development. We need people, institutions, organization within our community that has the capacity to do that level of advisement and helping out the black folks. Like, I know, people talk about heirs property on heirs property in general across the nation, right? When Chicago, for example, in New York, these elders have these homes that they've been in since, the heydays of Harlem and the like. They get in disrepair. Then some developer comes by and offers them pennies on the dollar for it. And then they flip it and they sell it for $10 million, right? So we need that type of infrastructure in our community, so that when people come, when the heirs property situation, or when you get an offer to sell your home, we have the infrastructure to make sure you don't get screwed over.
Now, Yeah, I totally agree. Before we head into reparations, because I want this to kind of be excluding reparations, whether it be legislation, uh, executive order. How can we ensure, how can we ensure equitable access to education, jobs, job opportunities, and financial resources to create a more level playing field for Black Americans?
Hmm. So I'm thinking about one of my Twitter colleagues called New Negro Republic. I'm not sure if you follow him on Twitter, but you
New
should. He's
Negro
great.
Republic. I think I've heard of it, though. I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, he's been in many of my spaces as well as hosting his own. But one of the things is we're going to have to truly understand what is on the books already set
Right.
aside for Negroes, right? And I use that language. I use all the words. I think we talked about this last time because all the words are on the books. And I don't want to choose one word and then leave all this other stuff that was set aside for us in that era to some other people to come grift on. So I use all the words because for me, we're all the things. Well, not for me, because in reality, we're all the things. And I want to honor all that. But one of the things he likes to talk about is the stuff that's on the books for Negroes and the special set asides that are there for Negroes specifically, that folks like Grace Ming and these other immigrants are coming over, turning it into Black or African American, which shoehorns the 1 billion people, over a billion people from the rest of the Black world. We're talking about Negroes, the people who were here at the time that the legislation happened, to whom the country owes the debt. And so we need to understand what's on the books for us. I've learned so much just in the last 4 months of Googling the thing that we talked about on Twitter, in Twitter education space, and then gosh, there's something else. Oh, and reading all these different elements. So we have to understand those things and be willing to capitalize on it. I think we need to have freedmen specific institutions for many things.
I concur.
Yeah, we need to have a descendant of slaves chamber of commerce that focuses and advocates specifically for us. We need freedmen specific unions, trade unions of this, and things of that sort as well. And or in the meantime, we also need to bust into all of these other institutions that have co-opted our legacy and claim our fair share of what is going on in the minority business stuff, and all of this other minority set asides and loans and grants and all of those types of things as well. So yeah, we need to reclaim our legacy is the short part of it. And at the same time, we need to recreate, because our legacy organizations are focused on so many other things. We need to recreate those organizations so that they advocate specifically for us.
Wow, that's a really good answer. I really don't have anything to add, because the one statement you made that makes 1000% is the reclaiming of our lineage, the reclaiming of our heritage, the reclaiming of our past. And I think that's really important what you stated there.
Well, thank you.
Moving into reparations, because we know that we have a lot of people within this space and they all, quote unquote, have their own definitions. But how do you define reparations, and what specific forms could they take to address these historical injustices of our people?
Brilliant question. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this, as well as the thoughts of others that you've understood. I can't envision a reparations package that doesn't include, first and foremost, direct cash payment. Like slavery, Jim Crow, and discrimination of today is an economic extraction, and the repair needs to fit the harm. The harm is economic extraction. The repair is economic infusion, point blank, period. In addition to economic infusion, and we can talk about amounts, there are policies that need to be fully implemented and enforced for the freed people. That'd be enforce the Constitution and all of our civil rights with the original intent that they were argued at the time that they were implemented. That would be ensuring that the practices of the nation at federal, state, and local levels are subject to preventing and punishing harms, to the freed people. So it's enforcing really the stuff that's already on the books and not allowing the Confederates, those who resist our repair, those who want to keep us in a servile or underrepresented position, not letting them continue to own and take over the federal government, because by my estimation, that's exactly what has happened. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, this is a tough one for me because I revolve around reparations so much that cash payments, of course, and of course, that's going to have to do with a lot of digging, a lot of research, the amount of wealth. Some people are saying, $16 trillion. Some people are saying 16 quadrillion dollars,
Right.
and how you're going to split that up between, 50, 55 million people. The money is first. Cash payments are first. Direct cash payments are first. Secondly, the reclaiming of land, digging back into the books of the land that was first granted to those, either through homesteads and then stolen back or tooken, or they were killed off their land, redistributing that land, and then distributing land of those descendants that we're here today. And then I think the most iffy thing, if I could use that word here, the most iffy thing is implementing a system of justice. I'm just going to narrow it down to three things. I know it has a lot more to do with a lot of other things, but money, land, and justice. Those are my three hottest topics. And justice is basically, when we look at case studies, we take, 2 men, 2 women who have never committed that particular crime. Let's say murder. They never, committed murder before, but they committed murder. They were proven to committed murder based upon the evidence. And then I know there's some discrepancies within the evidence, things being planted, but none of that exists. Let's just take, for instance, there was a black man, a white man, and a Chinese man. I don't know if you know about those jokes, but nonetheless,
yeah,
white man, Chinese man, they all commit the
walk
same
into
murder.
a bar and
Right. And they all can commit the same murder. Well, statistically proven that the black man most likely will receive life without parole. The white guy may receive anywhere from 10 to 15 years with parole, and the Asian guy may receive 10 years with parole as well. I want a system of justice to be implemented where everyone is receiving the same sentencing based upon their previous non-criminal or criminal background.
I feel that.
That's kind of mine in a really small nutshell.
No, I feel that for sure. And how do we get there? Because jurors are so biased. Part of the Innocence Project, or that infographic that I was referring to before, shows that white jurors and others are just more likely to throw the book at a black person, even to the point of convicting them when the evidence is shoddy or really questionable. So
we have to go over case study. Because we have these cases where white men committed murder. We have to take those studies in that city, in that state, and compare comparative justice to black men. Because if he's getting 10 years for manslaughter, but he's getting 15 years without parole for manslaughter, and they both have a non-criminal background, that's where I say the biases that you're referring to, you can throw the water out with the you can throw the baby water out with the whatever that
the
term
baby
is.
with the bathwater. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. But, and I know some people say that would alleviate juries, but again, if you have similar crimes, why don't you have similar time?
So if I'm hearing you properly, you're talking about, for justice for you, is looking at people who are sitting in jails right now and making parody of that. I get that. And you're also talking about going forward is sentencing based on what is typical for, honestly, like parity for white and non-black people, to making sure the black person ain't getting the book thrown at them, and setting standards and guidelines based upon that.
Yes.
Okay. Now Absolutely. That is intriguing. I wonder if that's something that Larry, I think his name is Krasner, I might be mispronouncing it, out of Philadelphia, is taking a look at. Hot child. You got jokes.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes. Oh man.
No. Yeah, that's a very intriguing idea, and I think it has merit. So who is going to be the pilot for how that would work? And is that constitutional where you're entitled to a jury of your peers? And how do you work that around it being constitutional in that way? I don't know. There's interesting questions there. I'm not poo-pooing it. I think it's great. So how do you work it out? And what legal mind who might hear your idea on that will take it on and propose a model for how to do it?
Absolutely. We know that so many of our people have been, wrongfully convicted by a jury.
Yeah.
But, and again, and I'm pretty sure some of us, not many, have been cleared by a jury. So I understand the constitutional part of that. But if it's been proven, right, nothing's been tampered with, maybe he even said that he committed the crime. I don't know. But it should be definitely, compared to someone within his state, based upon case studies. Because anything else, they do comparative studies based upon case study, and they bring those case studies up in court to make relevance to either be the argument they're trying to prove or the evidence that they have at the time. So, that's where I kind of base it off.
No, I think it's brilliant, and it's objective, and it takes the bias factor and tries to balance it in some way, or neutralize it. Really,
absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. Now, one of the questions though is the amount for reparations. So,
okay.
So I know Dr. Darity has proposed the $850,000 amount. And then in that study that they did with Thomas Kramer, Darity Kramer, and a whole bunch of other people, they estimated that the labor extraction was 6.2 quadrillion over those 250 years. That's how much labor was extracted. And it's interesting because there's an article published in Newsweek that talks about that 6.2 quadrillion, and the U.S. House they have that Newsweek PDF. The House has it within their documents. So you can find the Newsweek PDF 6.2 quadrillion there. So they're aware of it. And so $850,000 for 250 years of wealth extraction seems excessively small to me, because we have been here since, I can prove. Let's put it like that. Okay, right. Let's just leave it right there. And so to say that, to compare my comeuppance to what we should have compared to some new immigrant who came here, whose grandparent came here in 1940 into this anti-Black social order, and they've been able to make a couple $1 million over the last couple of generations of wealth and or income. I don't know. I think we're comparing ourselves to people who weren't here to begin with. So I'd be curious to know, what is the wealth difference between foundational Americans? So the white folks who were here from the beginning, what's the wealth difference between them and us foundational Black Americans, to borrow Tanique's nomenclature, because I use all the terms because they all fit, and I think we're talking about the same people. I'd be curious to know about that.
That's a really good question. I never thought of that.
Yeah.
I never thought of that. That's a really good question.
And then how do we take into account the businesses, since businesses are people too, is what I heard. So how do we take into account?
I don't think there's any Black Fortune 500 businesses.
Right, that started in 1850 or been around since 1830. How do we do the wealth differential between the businesses we couldn't own and couldn't start and couldn't invest in, right? And how do we calculate that into the slave lineage wealth gap? And basically what I'm saying is every Black American who is a descendant of U.S. slaves should probably be a multimillionaire through reparation.
Wow. We're going to need some of the most intelligent mathematicians on earth. I'm still struggling with 2 + 2, so it won't be me.
Yeah, me neither, but I'll try to understand it and I'll have them break it down. But yeah, I think it's millions versus 850. And keep in mind, they were trying to offer immigrants and per family member of separated families half of what our lineage wealth gap is, just for being denied the right to
Yeah.
come into the country. So 800,000 ain't looking quite just to me. And I've had this conversation with Dr. Derry. He knows how I feel about it.
Well, I definitely can't disagree with you on that, which leads me to another question. What challenges do you foresee in implementing reparations, both legally and politically?
Ooh, God, that's a deep question.
I like to give you the tough ones.
No, I appreciate it. And I love the thought. I love the thinking out loud. Legally, and when you say legally, do you mean through a lawsuit, or do you mean, what do you mean?
No, I'm saying political, would it be political legislation that will be legal, through the law? They will pass some legislation and legal through law.
Gotcha.
Because we know that the survivors of the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre, they tried to sue, but you see what happened there.
Yeah, and I'm not sure of the ins and outs of that case, the grounds for standing, the way the case was framed. I'm not sure about all the details of that, or if it's truly a judge who is committed to not implementing justice for these people who literally their families were the ones. They were there, right? During that time. So to your question about reparations legal, I think part of it is going to be creating, cultivating, and a leader who has the power to say yes, cut the check, cultivating the political will to do that. And I also think cultivating the political will to address whatever backlash happens in the populace around reparations, specifically for free people. And I'm just going to keep it 100. And I don't think I've said this out loud in a public forum. I can anticipate some potential white supremacist violence, just like during Reconstruction. And so if we are ready to actually implement the post-Civil War social contract, which includes reparation for the free people, you're going to have to be willing to recognize that there are Confederates in this country still who are willing to harm free people and the nation even, if we're going to actually implement the social contract as written and as developed by the framers. So it's the will to say yes. It's also the will to keep the Confederates under, to punish them if and when they act out. I think that obviously there have been so many reparatory efforts that have been done, and the promises have been made to us, and Confederates have sabotaged them. So Johnson is the one who himself was a Confederate, and he went through the impeachment process, and just by the skin of his teeth, he actually didn't get impeached, but they were impeaching him because he was a Confederate who was trying to undermine the freedmen and implementing treason while he was leading the nation. So we need some courage, and we're going to need probably some military might through the state's, what do you call them? Black Logic, not the army, but the reserves, if need be, through law enforcement.
Oh, National Guard?
National Guard. Thank you. That's what I meant. I think all of that is quite possible, and it has to be done. If it needs to be done, it has to be done.
You raised a good point there, that there may be some white supremacist outlash, and in my opinion, it has already occurred in some instances, especially on the nonviolent. When we speak about HR 4321 by Republican Brian Babin of Texas, no less.
Texas,
and I'm just going to run down this very quickly, if you can bear with me. I think this is the wrong one. My apologies. Here we go. To prohibit the United States government from providing bailouts or other financial assistance to any state or local government that enacts any law providing reparations for slavery and for other purposes. And then if you come down to Section 2, Paragraph A, in general, the United States government, including the Federal Reserve System and independent agencies, may not provide any loan, grant, or other form of financial assistance to the government or any state or political subdivision thereof, or any agency or instrumentally of such a state or political subdivision that enacts into law any program providing reparations on the basis of slavery or race, ethnicity, national origin, or historical practices related thereto. And subsection shall only apply to the unit of government so enacting a reparations program. So that's basically legislation that was introduced this year to block reparations, because whether it be the Republicans or the Democrats, it doesn't really matter, the political affiliation, but he took it to heart. Like, wait a minute, there's a lot of movement and energy behind this reparation thing. It looked like these black folk gonna get some money, and I got to make sure that they don't.
Well said, well summarized. So here's my issue with this. I'm not sure when HR 4321 was actually written and put out for public consumption. However, we know several things. One, Babin is a descendant of enslavers.
Yep.
You can find
Sure
that,
is.
right. He is from Texas, which has its own history of enslavement and ongoing commitment to undermining the free people.
And to answer your question, he introduced it June 23rd of this year.
June 23rd, and thank you, perfect. So the Supreme Court decision about affirmative action came out on June 29th, and that decision makes it clear there is nothing that prevents a government from implementing programs that repair the redress that government that repairs the discrimination that government has caused. So his bill is in contradiction to the Supreme Court decision recently, a few days after, right? So this is the affirmative action decision that I'm speaking of particularly. Not only that, but by my reading of the post-Civil War amendments, 13, 14, and 15, his bill is in violation of the Equal Protections Clause because he specifically mentions slavery, race, ethnicity, national origin, or historical practices related thereto. The affirmative action decision says specifically that there's nothing that prevents a government or an institution from redressing the harms that it has caused. And throughout that SCOTUS Supreme Court affirmative action decision, our legacy is all throughout it. The legacy of the freedmen. And Clarence Thomas went on to elaborate in his concurrence to the majority opinion that when Black Americans have benefited most and were included in historical programs, those programs have survived strict scrutiny because they're not race-based, they're based on injury. And when he includes historical practices related thereto, he is writing a bill that says you can't repair. Well, if you choose to repair the injuries, the federal government ain't gonna help you should something else happen related to your reasons. Exactly. So to me, it's a 14th Amendment of violation on two fronts. It's a 14th Amendment of violation on equal protections because other people have been repaired based on the injuries that they experienced because of their race. The Japanese, for example, we are always going hard in the paint for Jews who've experienced the Holocaust in another country. In addition, billions, and we pay, I think, millions per month to Israel in and of itself.
Yep.
In addition to that, I think it's a violation of the 14th Amendment disqualification section clause, where anyone who mounts an insurrection or rebellion against the Union and the Constitution is subject to disqualification from office. I think Babin introducing this clearly bigoted, clearly Confederate-oriented legislation is a call to action for the freedmen community to ask for his disqualification from holding office anywhere in these United States of America.
Wow. And I can't agree with you more. Believe me. I just have, I think I have this one more follow-up question, which is, it's a trick question. I'm just going to let you know it's a trick question.
Okay. Thanks for the heads up.
How can reparations contribute to healing racial disparities and promote social justice for Black Americans?
Oh, you're so good. So white people love to talk about how Black Americans hate white people. It's throughout Moynihan's report where he talks about there being a bitterness among even educated Black Americans toward white people. And here's the thing. I don't want to wake up thinking about white folks at all.
We don't.
The
We don't wake up hating
right,
white people. I hate the
not
white
at all.
people.
Right. And
We don't do that.
so my problem becomes when your anti-Blackness gets in my way. And that has happened to me and my family and the people that I love and care about, and other people that I don't even know, but I see their stories on the news. It's happened a lot. And so the issue is not your skin color. It's not even necessarily what happened in the past. It's that you are in the way of redress of what has happened to us and the cost and impacts of that. And your current rhetoric going forward perpetuates a climate where more of those harms are likely to happen and go unpunished. So your absence of a commitment to justice is the problem on top of what has happened in the past. Right? Who wants to have a relationship with people, or how do you expect to have a healthy relationship with anybody if you are continuing to harm them and are not committed to fairness and justice in your relationship to them? That's just natural human dignity, self-respect, to want to make sure that the relationships you have are based on justice and a redress of maltreatment, not just an apology, but you got some economic stuff you need to fix. So I think to that end, reparation has the ability to reset that relationship. When white Americans decide to admit and accept that the United States owes a debt to the freed people, it made promises of repair, and Confederates interfered with that promise of repair, and then went about the business of teaching, everybody that, it was a war of northern aggression, and there was a cause that had dignity that they were fighting for, right? And now we're dealing with that nonsense because you've all been trained to think that there was anything redeemable about the Confederacy when there was not. Reparation has the ability to redress that should white Americans decide to throw their public support behind it. Now, having said all that, reparation is a debt, and the United States government needs to figure out how to cut that check, even if 100% of white Americans disagree. This is not a matter of public opinion. This is a debt that's due. Everybody in your house can vote, yeah, we're not going to pay this, whatever your electric provider is. And what's going to happen? That debt is still due, baby, and there are consequences to that if you don't pay it. So even if 100% of people disagree, the Asians and the Hispanics and the other immigrants feel like, why am I paying this? It's a debt that predated you. And when you migrate to the country, you take on the good as well as the debts and the bad. And this is a debt that is owed. You didn't have to come. And when you came here, you took on all the things, and that includes the debt to freed people. So the government needs to figure that out.
Indeed, because I don't see anyone on the streets anywhere in the U.S. asking white Americans, well, how do you feel about the Native Americans receiving reparations each and every year and every month? Never see it. No one has an issue.
Yep. And here's the thing. Even if, considering our history, even if they did have a problem with the Japanese internment, the people who survived that getting repair, that was wrong. And that debt needed to be paid because they lost things.
Absolutely.
Even if they have an issue with, legitimate Native Americans, because we know there's some white people who pretend to be Native Americans in this country.
them
and benefiting, right? But legit tribes who
Indian
child and looking like Farrah Fawcett, but anywho, and been looking like Farrah Fawcett for a couple, 3, 4, 5 generations. But
my cousin Meghan Markle.
Child. But yeah, sorry, Black Logic. But yeah,
go ahead.
So that's the thing. The debt is owed. They need to figure out how to do it. It cannot be a matter of public opinion. And we know there are so many Confederates, hello, Babin, who have taken over our federal government, that the government needs to find a way to do it that goes around them and just cut the check.
I think you spoke directly to my thumbnail, because I definitely put that Confederate flag right behind them. Like, we know what you represent.
I mean, for real, let's call a thing a thing. Let's call a thing a thing. You're a Confederate, you're not a conservative, and you damn sure ain't no Republican. Because let's talk about the fact that the Republican Party was started for the express purpose of ending slavery and repairing the people who had been harmed by it.
Absolutely.
So you're an antebellum Democrat hiding off in my Republican Party, and I need you to get out.
Now, last question, I promise. I just have to know. It doesn't have to be a total analysis. You don't have to dissect it, but what are your thoughts? How did you feel after you saw the Montgomery, Alabama boat brawl?
So I watched.
Don't get in trouble. Don't get in trouble.
Thank you for that. I watched several angles of it, and it seems like more and more videos come out. And I think the one for me that was so convincing about the whole of what had happened was the ones taken by the people who were on the boat waiting to dock. The amount of time these people were waiting for this boat to move, and they refused to move. Right. And they were singing a song saying, move the boat. Like, we need you to go ahead and move the boat and all of these things. I think so I was relieved to see, of course, Black people standing up for each other, because part of the problem with white supremacy and the harm that comes to us is, right, they think we're by ourselves. They think ain't nobody gonna come to your aid, so they can just cut up and treat you any old kind of way. And they found out that wasn't true on that day on that dock. And I need more of that energy. Now, I don't need everybody to catch a beating all the time, but there do need to be consequences commensurate to the level of engagement that we're in at the moment that's going to squash the problem, right? And sometimes a beat down is necessary. Let's go ahead and face. You have to defend yourself. Yeah, I just need to see more of that energy. I'm hoping that this experience, that what they went through, is a sign of how Black Americans are reactivated toward that Black American community unity, right? So everything don't have to be a beat down, even though sometimes you have to defend yourself physically, defend yourself legally, rally to each other's aid when there are legal situations. That's the only redress, is for you to handle it legally. I think rally to each other's aid when you're in an organizational situation or a community situation where people are maltreating a Black person because they think they can get away with it. I think that's the kind of energy we have to have. We have to have that Frederick Douglass energy where we're calling people out, holding them accountable, and calling them into the right, correct way of relating to free people, point blank, period, and be unapologetic about it.
Absolutely. And I think that's why they push so much, or they allow so much, not the remittance or the revoking or changing any gun laws, because I'm not trying to start any racial riots, but I'll just say this. When it comes to fisticuffs, I'm going to lean on the side of us on that. That's all I'll say.
I hear you.
When it comes with
I know.
Yeah, that's all I'll say.
Yeah, in a fair fight, generally speaking. Yeah, in a fair fight, generally speaking, we do pretty well. And that's both with the physical element, but also with the organizational element, with the creativity element, with the hiring element, with the performance element. The issue, like you said before, and I forget who you quoted, but I just need you to get out of my way. That's it.
That's it.
Get out of my way.
That's it. Well, thank you, Ms. Long. Once again, I do appreciate all your intelligence, your time. I just love speaking with you, because you definitely think of things on a different level than I would, and it kind of just gives me a different aspect of wisdom and knowledge for me to ponder on after I look at this a couple of hundred times. So thank you so much. Is there anything would you like to say to the people? Follow your social medias?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I enjoy our conversation. So thank you for having me on again. I appreciate that, and I'm honored by it.
My pleasure.
In terms of social media, people can find me on LinkedIn, Pamela Denise Long. I keep it fairly professional, but I'm pretty consistent about how I show up, though I do know how to act depending on the environment. And then you can also find me on Twitter if you want it clear and raw and just like the real deal. And that's at P Denise Long on Twitter, and just Pamela Denise Long on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much.
And I'm on Instagram newly.
Instagram newly?
Yeah, Pamela Denise Long. You'll see my face. It's the same images on Twitter.
And I'm going to give a quick plug. And she soon here will be respawning her YouTube channel.
Yes. And yes, I am on YouTube, which I forget to say. Please go and subscribe to YouTube. There's already some content up there that you can listen to, but there's also some things that are coming down the pike where we're going to be sharing a lot more content and a lot more conversations with y'all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Be one.